help if I put that on. Do we have any apologies? Graham.
Bert Proctor, and I'm his substitute.
Also, Mr. Phil Butters, Chair.
Thank you. Do you have any declarations of interest in relation to anything? No? Thank you. Okay. Item number 3 then, the minutes of the previous meeting, which can be found on pages 3 and 4. Does anybody have any comments in relation to those?
There you go. Just very quickly, Chair, when did we move to a decision taken and not a proper set of minutes? If I missed it in the last one, I apologise, but this isn't a set of minutes. This is just what decision was taken, and that's not good enough, really. The minutes need to talk about and mention members individually when they make statements. Can we, if we're going to make this change, then we need to be made aware of it. I can't remember this being like this the last time for this meeting. So we need a proper set of minutes going. I'm not asking somebody to go back and do it again, but I think going forward, we need a proper set of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got an answer for this from Denise, I think.
Thanks, Chair. We were doing decision records very briefly. We are now reverting to minutes. So it's just a one-off for this committee, and all other committees will have minutes. Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to item 4 then. This is the annual audit letter, pages 5 to 28, and Andrew from Grant Thornton is going to give us a run through it. If you wouldn't mind, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is our annual report. This is slightly different from what you've received in the past, and this is because the National Audit Office changed the Code of Audit Practice for 2021. And one of the big changes was around the value for money work that we do. In previous years, we used to do basically a risk-based and exception-based review where there were some obvious red flags, and then did some further work in those areas. Now the Code of Audit requirements require us to do a detailed review across 15 lines of inquiry in 3 thematic areas, one of which is financial sustainability, one is governance, and the other one is around improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And under each of those themes, there's about 5 sub-questions that we have to review, do an assessment of the council's arrangements in those areas, and then provide a detailed commentary in the annual auditor's report, which is what you've got in front of you. Some of the other key changes as well as kind of the if you like, the broadening of the work that we do is around the fact that we don't actually have a conclusion anymore. We don't have an overall conclusion. Instead, what we have is a series of recommendations, and there's essentially 3 categories of recommendations. Starting from the bottom upwards is around improvement recommendations, and they're essentially where we believe there's areas for improvement or areas where the council can improve in line with best practice. The second category is around what we call a key recommendation. And this is where we recognise that there is a significant weakness in the council's arrangements, and therefore urgent action is needed. So key recommendations are more serious and require urgent action. And then the most serious recommendations are statutory recommendations, and that is where we use our wider powers because there is a weakness of such importance that we believe the full council needs to consider the recommendation and respond to it quickly. So they're the kind of things that we will raise now going forward, rather than providing you with that overall conclusion. In terms of headline summary of what we found through doing the work this year, you'll be pleased to know that we haven't raised any statutory recommendations or key recommendations. And in terms of the overall findings, they are generally very positive in terms of the arrangements in place at the council. We have, however, recognised 4 areas for improvement within the governance theme, and they're set out on pages 10 of the report. 11, 12 and 13. The first of those recommendations is around some improvements to the corporate risk register, where we believe that good practice would be to link the various risks to the corporate objectives, so that you can easily see how much risk there is against each corporate objective. The second one relates to internal audit coverage. As a result of the pandemic, the amount of assurance received by the council had reduced because of the restrictions in place. And we think it is very important that the level of internal audit coverage does resume back to normal, and that high priority is given to those areas that have not been reviewed for quite some time. The third one relates to the quarterly finance and performance information that is provided to members. There is a good overall summary of performance at council level provided, but we believe it is important that detailed information is provided at service level, so you can see performance levels at that sort of level of the organisation. And then the fourth recommendation is around the declarations of interest process. Through the work that we did identify some undisclosed interests as part of our check. We review the declarations raised, and we compare them to what we found on Companies House in terms of directorships, and we did identify some interests that hadn't been disclosed to the council. And in one instance, there were actually transactions with that organisation. So we do think there is a tightening up of those processes required going forward to make sure that any nil declarations are captured, and also a cross-checked Companies House to make sure that what has been declared looks to be complete as well. So they're the four improvement recommendations. We've got management responses to each of those, and we're content with those responses. So that's the kind of overall summary of the report. My view is that this is an overall positive assessment on the council's arrangements around value for money, on the basis that we haven't raised any key recommendations, we haven't identified any significant weaknesses, and 4 improvement recommendations, if I benchmark that compared to other organisations that we audit up and down the country, that is a relatively good level to get. It's relatively low. So overall, as I said, quite a positive assessment on the council's arrangements. More than happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. Questions, anybody? Graham?
Thank you. Andrew, you said you compare against best practice. Is that just other public authorities, or is there a wider best practice? Thank you.
We do compare against other local authorities in terms of what we see, but ultimately we compare against practice in terms of what's published by various bodies that may be SITFA, it may be regulators. So we don't just draw upon comparisons with other authorities, but that is obviously one of the things that we do look for.
Sarah?
It's just with regards to recommendations in terms of the internal audit service. Has that actually could have come at any cost to us? Because when I was doing the internal audit side of things, the more assurance you've got of internal audits doing their work, the less reliance we've got on external audit. So has it actually meant you've had to do more tests or spend more time on it? Has it cost us any more? And then secondly, with Companies House, is there a cost again to that? Do we have to register with Companies House to be able to search on it, or are you just happy with a normal search that anybody could do? Surely the onus is on the councillors really to declare these interests rather than the officers go looking for them.
So your first question in relation to internal audit, it hasn't led to us doing additional work, and therefore there's not been any extra charge on the council as a result of that. I should say that the amount of reliance we place on internal audit from an external audit point of view, particularly in terms of the accounts audit, is fairly minimal in any case. We use their work to risk assess in terms of the audit, but it's quite rare now that we directly rely upon their work. And that's largely because we don't do a huge amount of what we call controls reliance anymore. We do very much substantive audit, and that's largely been driven by regulatory requirements upon us. So there's a relatively low level. So the fact that internal audit are not necessarily providing greater coverage during the pandemic hasn't led to us doing additional work as a direct result of that. But obviously, it is something that we look for in terms of the control environment. And obviously, when we do see impacts around coverage, then that is a concern from a value for money point of view in terms of governance. So we do want to see that resume back to normal. But obviously, one of the main areas of concern is that there will be areas of the council that may not have been audited for 3 or 4 or 5 years now. And it's important that those areas do get some coverage very soon. And then the final point around related parties, you're absolutely right. It is incumbent on both officers and members to make sure all interests are declared. But as well as tightening up those kind of processes around declarations, we do think it is advisable to do it, the council to do an annual check on Companies House. Anybody can do that because it's completely free of charge. So the access to Companies House, there's no cost to that.
Thank you. Mike?
Andrew, this is probably more for an officer than you good self. So just going on from what the question that Sarah asked with regard to the personal declarations, from a officer point of view, has a full audit been undertaken now? So, for example, if that member was, for example, from my group, I'm not aware of any member of my group that hasn't met their responsibilities. And I think that I should be aware if they haven't, because it's not only themselves, but obviously the wider parties. So if there has been investigations done, can those things be made available to group leaders as well? Because I think it's very important that, as has been said, the members need to be responsible for this. This isn't the responsibility of officers. And the fact that officers are having to do this as a result of an audit is not good. And even worse, the fact that the financial statements have had to be amended because of a related party, that's not good at all. And the same as Sarah, when I've done this in the past, we shouldn't be looking for things like that when we've worked in finance. That's the responsibility of the members. And if group leaders need to get a little bit more assertive with members to make sure they're doing their proper due diligence, I need to know about it, and I'm sure the other group leaders do as well. Thank you, Chair.
Is there something that we could just look into briefly, Craig, and just find out what if we've got any particular worries about it, and just ensure that all the things are up to date or as far as we possibly can.
Yeah, sure.
If you come back to me on it, then I'll speak to the relevant people, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, okay. We'll obtain the information from Grant Thornton and
thank you, Chair.
By the Chair. Thanks.
Well, obviously, it looks overall a positive report, and I'm very pleased about it. Just one quick question. How would you sort of rate the performance this year, if this is possible, to how it was a few years ago? Have we improved, or are we going downhill, or what? Thanks.
I suppose it is hard to compare year on year, just purely because obviously what we've looked at has changed and has broadened out. So we're not necessarily comparing apples with apples now. But what certainly over the last 2 years, obviously it's been a difficult time with the pandemic, and the council's had to cope with the impacts of that. But generally, certainly, whilst I've been involved with the council over the last few years, we are seeing an improvement in arrangements in terms of how the council's been managed overall. So I think certainly seeing a general improvement in direction, but it is hard to compare because our work has changed from year to year. So I can't obviously give you a direct comparison.
That's good, thank you. Mike, did you want to ask something else?
Just a comment, really, Chair. Just to echo what you've said, it needs to be admitted that the thanks that this committee gives to all the members of staff that have done this and any stakeholders that have fed into the report. I think we all know just how difficult it's been over the last sort of 20 months, and for such a good report to come out of the council again. And I can't remember the last time we had qualified accounts in this authority, which is fantastic. And under the strain that you guys have been under, especially working from home, and as somebody who works in finance and works at home, I know just how difficult that is. So I'm sure you're glad to be back in the office occasionally. Must make things a little bit easier, but on behalf of the committee, thank you for all your work you've done.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Mike. Does anybody have any other questions? No. Okay, right. Well, in that case, thanks very much, Andrew. And we'll move on to item 5. Claire's going to go through this for us. It's the internal audit update for Q3, starting on page 29. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the third quarter update for the work of the internal audit team. So it covers a period from 1st of October to the 31st of December. So just to highlight on page 30, at the top, the table 1 at the top of the page there. So this is the reviews that were conducted and finalised during the period. So there's 4 reviews in that table. So the Benefit Services Health Check received a positive, good level of assurance. GDPR received an unsatisfactory opinion, which is a negative assurance. Bereavement Services was satisfactory, a positive audit. And business continuity, which looked at the council's business continuity arrangements during the pandemic, was again a good positive opinion. So just to highlight, we have 5 levels of opinion. So we have 2 positive, a marginal, which is sort of a neutral position, and 2 negative. So we've got the good and satisfactory in the positive opinions, and unsatisfactory and unsound being our 2 levels of unsatisfactory opinion. What I'll do actually going forward, I'll include a table that includes those, because apologies for missing that off. I should include that table of what those different levels mean. So the general data protection regulations that received an unsatisfactory opinion, it was the higher of the unsatisfactory, you see what I mean, the lesser negative opinion. So that audit had 6 recommendations, 1 being high, 4 medium, and 1 low, which overall the opinion was unsatisfactory. So the key areas of improvement that we identified during that audit were around data protection training, making sure officers with GDPR responsibilities are actually talking to each other so we haven't got any gaps or any duplication, and making sure we've got performance monitoring in place. Would like to say, though, that the officers we spoke to during this audit were really receptive, really positive. They've got a good action plan in place to make sure these recommendations are implemented. And I think the council is in a position to lots of other authorities in that the GDPR has been sort of a massive change for local authorities. So I feel confident that, having spoken to officers, the next time we report that position will be improved. So still on page 30, table 2 there shows the audits we still have in progress, which we're hoping to finalise during this last quarter. So say there's a number of audits there that will be completed over the next quarter. Over the page on page 31, there's details of the number of recommendations outstanding. So we do monitor that very closely to make sure that when we conduct a review that recommendations are implemented, because that's when action happens to improve things. So it's really important that we monitor that. So as paragraph 2.6 says, by the end of December, we'd issued 280 recommendations and 252 of those have been implemented, which represents 90%. And we are hoping to get to that 96% by the end of the year. So there is some further details in Appendix A, which is on page 33. So there's a summary there by directorate. So as you can see, there are 28 recommendations that haven't been implemented, but actually only 14 of those are overdue. The one high-level recommendation that's overdue is the one that I think we discussed at the last audit committee, which was in relation to the IT governance audit, which related to the senior information officer for the GDPR. So just bringing you back to page 31, just to highlight that, I do keep the plan under regular review to make sure that we are making sure we've got that coverage this year, given the issues last year with the pandemic. And coming back to Andrew's point about making sure that we've got coverage, and I am able to provide an annual opinion this year, and we are on track to do that. And we will be making risk assessments for future years to make sure that we are making sure we've got that coverage where audits haven't been conducted last year due to the pandemic. And in March, when I bring the next report, I'll be bringing that next year's audit plan, which will show how we're going to pick up that coverage. But yeah, I am satisfied that we will be able to bring an annual opinion for this year. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Claire. Do we have any questions? Graham?
Thank you, Chair. Claire, in 2.2, you've answered what you're doing about the GDPR. But when we communicate with the public, asking them for data, as in filling a form out or something like that, on those forms, do we correctly inform the public what we're going to do with that data?
I'd have to go back and check the audit report, but my understanding is, because we've not raised that as a specific recommendation within the report, that yes, that is happening. But I can just double check that and come back to you. Yeah.
Mike?
That question feeds quite well into what I was going to, so taking that question one step further. So one of the major exercises from a GDPR point of view that we've undertaken as an authority in the last 12 months was gaining information from people around Waldish Quarry. And then all of a sudden, their data has now had to be handed over to Waldish Quarry Limited as part of the legal case. Can we establish whether or not, and it feeds back into Graham's question about, it seems like we didn't let people know when we gather that information that that information could be handed over to the quarry themselves. And we need to establish whether or not that actually did happen. It's a simple yes or no. If it did, great. And then actually we can feed back to residents. But if it wasn't, that is a serious GDPR mistake. Well, I believe it is. And so all the people across Newcastle don't think it's a mistake because they gave their information freely and didn't expect that it would be handed over to a third party. And I'm just asking the question. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Denise. Are you able to shed any light on this for us?
No, I can't, but Dan is on Zoom and he can speak if Rob can make sure he's available, please. Is that all right? Thanks.
Good evening, members. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, hi. Yes. Well, thank you for those questions about Wally's Quarry. It's a particularly complex matter, not as straightforward as you might imagine. When we were collating the information for a significant period of time, our privacy notices indicated that complainants' personal data will be kept confidential, and that is usually the case in connection with statutory nuisance and regulatory inquiries. However, as we got quite advanced into the court process, it became apparent that we were going to need to disclose that data, and the Chief Executive has sent a letter out. I believe it's on the website. It explains in some considerable detail why we need to release that data. And as soon as we became aware that we had to release that data, and I have to say, there was a lot of legal discussion and consideration and research taken as to what we could release, whether we were entitled to redact. And we carefully and meticulously went through that process and ultimately arrived at the view that we would have to disclose that personal data. And as soon as that became apparent, we changed our privacy notices and we wrote to everyone to let them know. And I personally have been managing a inbox responding to people who have had concerns about that process and explaining to them as best I can the process that we went through and dealing with any specific concerns they have in relation to any particularly sensitive personal data. So it's not as straightforward, I'm afraid, as saying from the outset, by the way, we will disclose your data, because ordinarily we don't. It's only the very complex and unique circumstances of this case that required us to release that data. And like I say, as soon as it became apparent that that had to happen, we updated our privacy notices. We let everyone know, and I personally have been dealing with complaints and concerns about that issue. So I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Does that answer your question?
I think it's a legal answer. I don't think it's the answer I wanted, but that's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions in relation to this report? No? Okay, thanks very much then, Claire. We'll move on to item number 6, which is the matter of the appointment of the external auditor for the 5-year period from 23-24. And Craig's going to give us a bit of information on this, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, Chair. Do you want me to go out the room whilst you have the discussion? Probably, yeah.
The council opted into the National Auditor appointment arrangements established by PSAA for the period covering the 2018-19 audit of the accounts to the 2023 audit of the accounts. The PSAA is now undertaking a procurement for the next appointing period, covering audits for the 2023 to 24 and 2027 to 28 accounts. We have the option to either arrange our own procurement and make the appointments ourselves, or to do this in conjunction with the vast majority of other authorities and take advantage of the National Collective Scheme administered by the PSAA. The national offer provides the appointment with limited administrative cost or burden to the council and offers potential savings or economies of scale that a national procurement provides as opposed to what we could do ourselves. I think the way forward is to go with the national procurement, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Craig. Mike?
A very simple one to start off with. It's 5 years, Craig. And this seems a very, very long time to tie the hands of any administration going forward. Now I understand the economies of scale and I understand all that sort of thing. But for the last 2 years, if not longer, but definitely for the last 2 years, because I've double checked it myself, the outside auditor has come back for a change of contract. So anything that we would have gained from being part of a large procurement exercise was lost when the awarded body came in and actually asked for a change of contract. And actually they didn't ask. They made it very clear that if we didn't agree to it, then there would be problems with the audit. So what sort of promises have we got that that won't happen again? Because, we've signed a contract in good faith. And I'm pretty sure it's more than 2 years, but I know it's definitely the last 2 years they've come back for a change of contract, and actually it's not a small change either. They've both been significant amounts that they've added onto the contract. So any economies of scale gain was lost with the extra requests.
Just on that, Mike, I think it's fair to say that the government has actually funded a very significant, I couldn't tell you how much exactly, but a very significant part of those increases through the COVID money that the contribution that they've made towards the extended costs that we've had. So I don't know, maybe Craig can give us a bit more information on that.
Sorry, absolutely, Chair. But it's still the public purse. The public purse has still had to pay out more money, regardless of whether it was the government. There was a contract signed in good faith. If we, as individuals, sign contracts, it would be very unlikely that we could renegotiate them halfway through because of a change of circumstance. That's my question. And I take your point that from a Newcastle point of view, we might not be as worse off as I thought. But at the same time, the public purse is still as worse off.
Thanks for your question. The financial reporting standards have put a lot of extra pressure on to the auditors, and that is the reason for the increases. I think, and I can't say 100%, but if we'd have had any of the bodies who audit local authority accounts, I think we would have seen the same levels of increases because of the pressures that were put on them. Would have been nice if Andrew could have answered the question, but it's a bit of a conflict of interest, isn't it, really? So I do think no matter who we would have had, we'd have been in the same position. And I don't think that if we'd have gone out on our own or as part of the national procurement, that would have made any difference to us. The pool of auditors that we would be able to appoint ourselves is pretty much the pool that the national procurement can appoint from as well. So I appreciate it.
And the 5 years, what is there any particular reason it's a 5 year contract?
Well, the longer we go out, the greater the economies of scale that the PSAA can achieve. I think it pretty much boils down to that.
And, I think that one of the issues we have is that it's difficult for an organisation such as this, and indeed the councils, to be in a position where they've got the expertise to go and evaluate auditors. I mean, that's one of the problems we have. By using an outside body, as Craig said, there are potential economies of scale. With hindsight, we can see that there have been increases in cost, but then again, there have been changes in legislation and guidance. So those things would still have affected us, and it's whether we feel we'd have been better off able to negotiate or renegotiate contracts ourselves, or whether we've got a better deal out of the PSAA. It's questionable. We don't know the answer. We have to basically, use our best judgment on it.
Andrew did say at the start of his spiel that the National Audit Office had demanded changes, significant changes, which added to the costs. That applies no matter who you went to, because the National Audit Office govern this. And you can either say, you don't, and you can't ignore them. You must comply. You do not have any power not to comply with the National Audit Office. So no matter what contract it was, it would have gone up.
That's Graham. Stephen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mike, I've got to say, not a surprise, this question from you. I think it was, rather expecting it. Two things. On Thursday, the County Council is going to put this through full council on Thursday, because it's every authority in Staffordshire, including the county. So everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet. But we're fishing in a very, very small pond. So say we go on our own and we set up our own independent panel, all of which will cost money, all of which has to be recruited, but they're still looking at the same number of people. They're not going to go to this other company and say, oh, well, we'll come do it for you, because they're not. How many is it, Craig? 10 or 12, something like that? People actually do this job? That sort of figure, that's the pool we're fishing in. The county use Ernst & Young. We're lucky that we've got Grant Thornton. But I understand exactly what you're saying, but we don't have the freedom of the free market to go and look. There is a very, very small pond of people we can use. And I totally support this. It's and every other authority is doing the same thing. So we might be the only ones that are right and they might be all wrong, but I tend to think we're all right. Cheers.
Final comment, Mike?
I like what you did there. I don't disagree with any of that. And I've worked in local authority finance for most of my life, so I understand the pool of people that are working in it. My point is, when a private, if I was to enter into a contract with somebody, I wouldn't have the right to just make it, unless I put it into the contract, that I could increase it due to government changes. Because if I was doing financial work for somebody and the regulations changed, that is part of my job to meet the changing regulations. And if their tender didn't include some sort of an allowance for changes in administration or changes in requirements, then that should fall on that party and not the public purse. I think everybody's just ignoring the fact that all the costs have gone up and the only people that have lost are the people out there. Nobody else lost. All the companies made money. It was it was members of the public that lost. And that's my point. It isn't the fact that there's only a small pool. I know that. There's probably less than 12 actually in the modern workplace now that will do it. But when you sign a contract, you sign a contract. And I thought this authority, and I think any authority that simply just says, yes, we'll pay you whatever, they're letting their residents down. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, we did actually send the increased costs for review to the PSAA because we wanted to ensure that the authority wasn't paying out any more money than it needed to. So that was what actually happened. I specifically asked that happened, and I know it did happen. The other point that I think you might not be right on is if there was a significant change in legislation in certain areas of business, maybe construction or whatever, and you were in the process of carrying out a contract, but through government legislation, you had to change your working practices. I think that you probably would be in a position where you could renegotiate it. I wouldn't fancy being in court over it, but you know, I'm sure that there are issues whereby, if due to government legislation changes and significant ones, that there would be an opportunity to look at the costs. Anyway, does anybody have any other comments that they want to pass forward to the the meeting that we're going to be discussing at full council anyway, I believe. Okay, right. Thanks very much. We'll move on to item number 7 then. Could somebody give him a shout? Item 7, the Q3 corporate risk management report, and Craig's got lucky on this one as well. So if you'd give us some info on that, please, Craig.
Thanks, Chair. This report provides the committee with details of the progress made by the council in enhancing and embedding risk management during Q3. 9 risk reviews were overdue at the time of the report being published. However, only 3 of these now remain overdue. There were no risk level increases during Q3. During Q3, we produced 3 new sets of risk profiles, and they were in relation to the Future High Streets Fund and the Newcastle and Kidsgrove Town deals. The risks on those focus around contractor risks and the spending of the funding in terms of timeliness and making sure that we keep within the budgets. These risk profiles will be monitored by the project boards for each of those funds and then reported back as necessary to this committee. Appendix A provides an update on the corporate risks. And finally, the committee is asked to identify any risk profiles that they'd like to scrutinise in more detail at the next meeting of the committee. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I think that it might, given the issues on the internal audit, I think it might be worth us looking at cyber risk and data breach in more detail at the next meeting. Does everybody have anything different that they want to look at? So if you wouldn't mind, if we could look at those 2 risks. Any other questions on the risk management report? Anybody? No? Okay, excellent. Thank you. Item 8 then, the work plan, page 65. Okay, well, we've got 1 meeting left that we'll all be at, potentially. Does anybody have anything that they feel that we should bring into that meeting that's not already identified?
I think it looks a very busy meeting anyway, Chair.
Yeah. It is likely that the external audit plan for the 21-22 audit will be coming to the April meeting, which I don't think is included.
Right,
Currently.
21-22 audit plan. Okay.
This reports for internal progress report. It will be the annual report.
Right. Yeah. There's just one modification. The first item in that list, it says Q4 internal audit report, and it'll be the annual internal audit report, which is essentially the same thing, but it covers the whole year.
Yeah, it'll be a review of the whole year, Chair, and it'll also include the annual opinion, which is also we had the conversation about. So yeah, it's worth making that point.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, I've not been informed of any urgent business, so thank you all for your attendance, and I'll see you in April, if not before. Thank you. Good night.